out a gun to the guard, shoot gun everywhere as they command the people inside the room. Their actions made the people nervous and scared. Then the group mandatorily puts them in one corner of the room to monitor everyone easily. Day 1, they closed all the curtains around and locked all the gates and doors. The people inside the room were declared as their hostage victims. Also that day, a BBC duty reporter, Kate 80, walks towards the building knowing that her friends are getting their Iran visas. As she walks nearly to do the building, a police officer blocks her way for her not to come close. She then realizes that the embassy was occupied by the force of the terrorists. The scene then changes. A group of fully geared men, the Special Air Service Regiment, also known as SAS, walks in a room to practice a drill to perform great tactics led by their leader Rusty Furman. In the middle of their routine, they receive a message through a beeper. Rusty thinks that someone might push the wrong button. But then, they were called for the hostage-taking currently happening in the Iranian embassy in London. Back in London, a well-dressed and decent man, Max Vernon, chief inspector of the Metro Police, also was summoned to the incident. He enters the Montessori nursery school, 7 doors away from the embassy. He climbs up the stairs and walks into a room where the authorities are gathered. Also in that room, they receive a call from the terrorists, naming themselves as the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan. Their leader, Salim, talks to them as he demands to release the 91 Arabs held captive in Iran. In addition to that, they threaten the authorities that if their demand were not met, they would kill a hostage tomorrow noon. Then the call was hung up. After that call, the authorities assigned to the incident were introduced to each other, including Max. Then they somehow discussed a member of them, PC Trevorlock, who was one of the hostages. Then they prepare all the needed types of equipment, including a camera and a telescope, to monitor the area. On that night, different TV stations were gathered outside the Iranian embassy, setting up their cameras to capture every detail of the incident, including the BBC. The scene then changes. In the Cabinet Office briefing room, the authorities are gathered up discussing all the possibilities and suggestions that need to perform. Also that night, the SAS finally reaches London. They bring up all their guns and tools needed as they go to the Royal College of General Practitioners, a room next to the Iranian embassy. Day 2. In the room next to the Iranian embassy, the SAS were preparing and gearing up themselves to storm and burst into the building where the terrorists are in, while Rusty was having his cup of coffee, walks into a wall of the room where he stares at the photographs of the hostages. The SAS were then instructed that if somebody got killed by the terrorist at any moment, they were going to storm out the building. At the SAS mobile command post, behind the Iranian embassy, Major Hector Gulen, the SAS unit commander, walks into the room monitoring the incident. While back at the Montessori nursery school, they receive again a call from the terrorists demanding and arguing to set free their Arabian comrades. The interpreters receiving their calls were very pissed by their actions. Later that day, Major Hector beeps the SAS to be ready as the deadline of the terrorists is in 15 minutes in full gear. The SAS bravely walks through their designated posts. Then an official went to Max and told him what's going on and all the plans of the head of the SAS unit. He is not convinced of what's happening and comes up with a plan that cannot result in any violence. In his eagerness, he then calls the terrorists. He then answered by the leader, Salim. Max tries to calm up the situation and negotiate with them peacefully. He then explains carefully what needs to be done and adds that if Salim can free up a hostage, maybe it will help ease the situation. Then suddenly, a gunshot was heard. The authorities were alarmed, and the SAS was already on their posts. Then a man can barely walk and walks out from the room where the terrorists are. The police near help him get into the ambulance as they think he was the one who got shot. But in good luck, he was just an ill hostage who got freed up by the terrorists because of his illness. Back in the room where the authorities are in, they receive a confirmation of the hostage that has been freed. The SAS orders the unit to quickly stand down. Then, Max immediately thanks Salim for doing such action. Then he offers the terrorists food. In that way, he can get their trust. Salim agrees and demands Max to take the food himself. In the bravest manner, Max walks towards the Iranian embassy to give the terrorist a supply of food. He then uses a long stick to reach the window of the room. Salim sneaks out in the window and reaches for the food. He then demands Max that they need an Arab ambassador and a bus that will take them to Heathrow. A more heated conversation continues, but in the end, Salim agrees to the extension of 48 hours for his demands. Day 3. One morning, the SAS unit walk towards their vehicles, leaving the incident area. As they are on their vehicles, they are informed that their plan has been changed. The terrorists will be given a bus to take them to Heathrow, and they will attack while they are on their way. The scene then changes to the SAS unit practicing its tactics and plans on the day of the assault. Back at the office where the authorities were gathered, they talked about the plans and suggestions of giving the terrorists a bus to Heathrow, but the majority of the government officials disagree. Then the colonel tells the SAS to prepare a stronghold assault. In the night, the government gathers men to break some parts of the wall on the other side where the terrorists are in, and then they put a microphone device to spy and hear their conversations. Then, some unit of SAS sneak out to the building's rooftop. They found a light well at a glass panel. On that view, they can see terrorists abusing and threatening the hostages. That light well brought a good impact on their plans. Day 4. The terrorists are shown abusing the hostages. One of the terrorists, Faisal, gets one of the hostages and prepares him to kill. But then, Salim keeps convincing them to wait for the given hour. Their heated conversation was all heard in the other room where Max and the other officials were because of the installed microphone device. In that morning, while Max is hearing the argument of the terrorists, an official asks for his presence. He then informed that the Arab League has refused to be part of the negotiation and wants to have the terrorists have a safe passage out of the UK, but their government completely refuses. The scene then changes. Major Hector was shown talking to the leader of the SAS, and they've been discussing Rusty to lead the upcoming assault. Major Hector then agreed to the leader's suggestion to prove Rusty's ability. Also that day, Salim calls Max. He angrily asks for the demands he requests, and Max answers him calmly that the ambassadors are on their way but will take more time. But little did Salim know, that was a false truth. He also tells him that their army is preparing to attack them as they hear noises outside and through the walls. Max did his best to make him feel at ease, and he made the drilling and chirping of the walls stop. In addition to that, Salim asks for more, and he then requests to speak to the BBC, but then Max tells him that it needs a day or two to grant. In the middle of their call, Faisal tells Salim that they cannot ask for an extension. Later that day, the SAS team was gathered up and informed that they now had the approval to storm the embassy if proof of murder had been confirmed. Day 5. In a covered area, the SAS team is shown practicing their plans, led by Rusty. Gunshots and explosions are heard throughout the area. Carefully, they were able to execute each plan and clear each room. Their goal is to save more hostages. The scene then changes as the SAS team prepares for their assault. They geared themselves and gathered all the guns and pieces of equipment they needed, and then they went immediately but carefully to their designated posts. As instructed, they will just wait for Major Hector to tell them when it is ready to storm out the building. 6 o'clock on the evening arrives. Max and all the other officials are watching the BBC News as they wait for them to read the request of Salim. They were alarmed as the BBC doesn't read fully what Salim wants the world to know, and the SAS team was also informed to get ready. Max is very hesitant to answer the phone rings, thinking what Salim would say and do because of what happened. But in luck, as he answers it, Salim thanks him for what he has done. He also added that they were very happy that the BBC read it fully. To show gratitude, Salim releases 2 more hostages that day. Also that day, the SAS team stood back due to the order of Major Hector. Day 6. An interpreter was shown hearing and translating down the conversation he's been hearing. The terrorist is heard shouting. Then a hostage showed tied up in a staircase while Faisal was pointing a gun and threatening him. Outside the Iranian embassy, Kate was shown reporting on a live broadcast of the happenings in the area as well as the plans of the government. The scene then changes. Rusty was facing a wall with photographs of the terrorists. He then memorized the faces of everyone for him to prepare for the assault. He also tells his comrade to do the same thing as well. Back in the room where Max at. The phone rings again, and it is PC Trevor Locke. He then informs Max that they have a hostage tied up in the staircase. He convinces him that the terrorist will do what they say if their demands don't meet. Suddenly, Salim gets the phone and talks to him, and he demands a bus to get them to the airport. Then Salim went to the staircase and tried his best to calm Faisal and prevent him from killing the hostage. But a more heated conversation has come. Faisal got angrier. For that reason, he kills the hostage in 3 shots. The government officials, SAS team, Mr. Max, heard the gunshot. Max immediately waits for Salim to answer that phone to confirm who has been shot. Then Salim just says they can collect the body. Also, that day, the government made their unanimous decision, the military would take over. The colonel also requests Max to keep Salim talking through the phone to divert his attention while the SAS storm out the building. Then, the SAS team quickly prepared themselves and all the tools and equipment needed. And as planned, Max keeps distracting Salim as the SAS team storms out into the building. They plan to bomb the glass panel in the light well while the others are on the roofs and the doors waiting for the command. Salim heard a suspicious sound while they were still on the phone. He then hung up the call and ran immediately. That's when Major Hector signals the SAS team. They storm out the building through the windows and doors, clear up all the room to save all the hostages. Salim and the 4 terrorists had been killed. Then, the SAS led the hostages outside.